Ladies and gentlemen, who's ready for a bandwagon? Hey everyone. So, as you've probably seen if you've been on the internet for more than 5 seconds at this point, there's a whole bunch of tier list videos going around. Now, I know that you can say, oh, well, everyone's doing it, but the fact is, well, these are actually kind of fun for nerds like me. So, I thought I'd decide to make one of my own. And, since a lot of you know me from Brony D&D, and the fact that I'm a big fan of the series, even before I actually became a part of it, well, I decided to make my own tier list for the series. I'm going to start with just Season 1 for now, then probably do Season 2 in like a week or so, and save Season 3 for, when all the episodes of Season 3 are up, which, well, we're heading to the end game now, pun not intended. Well, reference not intended. Anyway, let's start with Episode 1, which is one of the few that didn't actually have a title card, as you can see. Now, Episode 1, I was tempted to put in C tier, since, it's the first episode. It should probably set the standard. However, the series gets a lot better since then, and I really feel it's raised the bar a lot higher. So when you look at Episode 1 in comparison to everything else, it really doesn't scale that well because, it's slow, there's a lot of awkwardness. I think that a lot of stuff Josh put in there was less to advance the story and more just to give everyone time to get used to their characters, the abilities they can do, which at the time it was a solid idea. It's just on reviewing it doesn't hold up because as well compared to the rest of the series. So Episode 1 sadly gets a D tier. Wasn't horrible, it just was below the par that this series has set for itself by this point. Same 2, I'm gonna be putting Chapter 2 into D tier. It did have our first fight scene, but it was... You go back and watch, and that fight scene is pretty poorly paced just because everyone's still getting used to their characters, used to what everyone's going to do. Again, no one's fault, everyone was new there. But again, if I'm trying to be fair here, I'll be putting Chapter 2 into D tier again. And sadly, admittedly this is going to be a run, same goes for Chapter 3 as well. Again, not much was happening in that chapter. Yes, there was, there were a few funny moments. The characters were looking to try to get out of the prison, but it still felt like the story was just getting started. It felt like, what's the word I'm looking for? Not spinning its wheels, but it felt like it hadn't really... It felt like it was still in the filler plot at this point. And of course, there were still some pacing issues with people, just still, people weren't as confident in what they were going to do, so there was a lot more hesitation, I feel. And sadly, the trend continues continues with the breakthrough. Again, breakthrough, I was tempted to put in C tier because we get the introduction of Jaminia. We get to see the conflict that, we get to see the real start of the conflict in the series. But I thought about it more and just, compared to other episodes that are put in C tier, this one doesn't really hold up. At best, it would be a low C tier, and even with what it does add, I don't think it quite adds enough to break it out of D tier, especially since those elements are really only like at the very end. And I promise, this isn't going to just be me being, negative Nancy the whole time. It's just, as would be expected, the earlier episodes are probably going to be some of the worst. It's just how it is. And sadly, the trend continues with the tunnel and the trap. The trap was meant to be here, sorry. Because honestly, if you ask me to if you ask me what happens in each of them, besides going through the maze, I really do not remember that much detail at all. The two of them kinda blurred together for me. Now, however, we start to pick up the pace with our first C tier, The Doubting, Chapter 7. This is where we meet Simula, but we also get the moment with Grimjaw. Not only was Grimjaw a memorable, if short-lived antagonist, but I really like I really like what he did with Jaminia. I really did like, that the party does get a little bit of doubt starting to be placed in the mind. He doesn't convince them, but there is a few questions, there's a few conflict, and it's the first hints of that character development that really has made this series shine. And of course, Simula, great antagonist, great introduction for her. Now we get to the episode that actually started to get me interested in this series, which is Chapter 8, another one that Docs apparently forgot to put a title card in. But anyway, Chapter 8, B tier. This was the chapter where I really started to actually... The series went from, something I was just watching out of obligation to, okay, now I'm actually intrigued. Now I honestly want to know what's going to be happening. And I think part of that might be because, this was the part where Josh started to introduce stuff that I hadn't seen. For those of you who don't know, for up until about episode 10, Josh had play tested the sessions with me just to get them to work because this was more or less his first time DMing. Like, yes, he DM'd a one shot before, but that's not what you'd call a lot of experience. And of course, well, trying to get my words in order. And of course, there's a big difference between DMing a one shot and DMing a full campaign. So I kind of already knew what was going to happen for most of these episodes. But while I had technically seen the overall plot what's going to happen from episodes 8 to 10, episode 8 was the first introduction to the Warden's Nightmare. That was something new, and it was handled brilliantly. And again, it would introduce that character development, those character moments that I just really enjoy from the series. So you're probably wondering, okay, if you liked it that much, why isn't it in A or even S tier? Simple. The series gets better. So, Chapter 9, The Duet. And sadly, not a lot happens in that one, so I'm going to have to put it in D tier. Again, Season 1, you get a lot of rough episodes to start with. But the Slaver, it had a very interesting combat encounter. It had some great conflict between Jalarum and Jaminia, and of course, we all know what it's set up for later. So that one gets a B tier. Again, just remember, B tier is still an above average. Origins, B tier. Again, great moments of character development, introduction of Baleen. I love that moment earlier on where Faithurin, we have the "I'm sorry, I love you" moment with Jalarum. We have that part earlier with Jaminia, slaving through the night just to get the party's information on her sister, and Faithurin actually showing concern for her for once. Again, overall, just a great episode. The Forest. Not as good as the previous two, but it had what I feel up until then was one of the best combat encounters against, one of the best combat encounters that the series had seen so far against the Will-O-Wisp. sadly, part 2 of that combat encounter, the Druid, is when that battle started to. It went from fun and intense, but at that point, the part 2 was when I felt it started to drag on a bit. So, part 2 unfortunately goes into D tier. The Viper, though, that that is another B tier. We get that great moment with Cross and Simia's assassin. We get Lana, who we now know as Lana, giving Rose a much needed "get your shit together" girl. And again, overall, just a fun and interesting episode. So the Viper, B tier. The Council. Okay, funniest moment in the series, at least in my opinion. You know, that elf was rather gorgeous. I'd like him to ride into the sunset. Some just an entertaining bit. Not an entertaining bit. I'm putting that in C tier. It had some character development. Moved the plot along and was generally entertaining. Putting that into C tier. The Shadow, of another another very fun combat encounter. We get the start of the Jallerman stairs. You know what? Yeah, I'm gonna put the Shadow into B tier. If only just for that moment of Josh being a freaking nerd with that whole with the smooth criminal scene. The Moon, C tier. Not too much happens, but it's interesting what is. Like, it's kind of similar to the Duet in that it's mostly a shopping episode, but I feel we get a little bit more character development from that. We get the introduction of Erdos and his task of Jalaram, which, sets up stuff for later. We get him starting to teaching the guy Starkov son and getting suspicious of Cross, etc., etc. Then we get the Arrow. That's a strong B tier. Maybe bordering between, like, if the Shadow is bordering between C and B tier, the Arrow is bordering between B and A tier. Great moment between Cross and great moment between Cross and Owen that really makes this scene. And of course, introduction of Solinar and all of that, which, as you know, becomes very important later on. The Cat, still fun, not quite as good as the Arrow. I'm putting the Cat into C tier. The Coast, again, C tier. Great moment between Ivan and the Warden. Not the best Warden, not the best Warden, as we now know, Owen Nightmare sequence, but I feel that's only by comparison. The one with Amber and Cross and Thurin, they were fantastic, and the Ivan one is just good. We introduced to Amata and Siolik. We and of course we get the introduction of that great moment with the first appearance with the Balor. But at the same time, when I was first seeing it, it did feel a bit of a detour. It felt like the Labyrinth was filler. As we know now, it changed from a moment that was originally meant to be filler to one of the most pivotal moments in the series, but we'll get to that in a second. So up next, chapter, I think, chapter 21, The Labyrinth. This was another one that I was debating on, because there were times when it started to get a bit slow. It was also one of the sessions, early on, I think one of the biggest flaws the series had production-wise was the music didn't always match the tone. And I think that's because, whoever was editing was given a track to work with, and pressed for time, I assume. They just put the tracks in where they were told, but it didn't always fit. And I think the best example was when Owen was fighting his mirror copy. It's also a similar problem that I had with the Will-O-Wisp fight. But anyway, Owen's fighting his mirror copy, and the way it's narrated and the action happening, it feels like it's supposed to be a fairly tense scene. but the music is gentle, relaxing. It almost feels like the kind of music you'd want to fall asleep to, and that didn't help. However, at the same time, you've you've introduced, it's got a lot of fun puzzles. You introduce the Balor, one of the most memorable and outright terrifying antagonists, to just the sound of its footsteps still could send people into a panic months and months later, and of course the death of Jaminia, which just sets up so much for the series, and because of that, it deserves an A tier. Despite my niggling nitpicks, it adds so much to the series. It meant so much for the series. Gotta give it an A tier. And the immediate continuation, The Well, that's an A tier too. You know, as painful as it was at the time, it meant so much for the character and just that fighting, that breaking down. It was just a real crisis point for the team. It was at the time, it was their darkest hour. And, it was just that episode, an emotional roller coaster that deserves an A tier. And, like I said, I promised you the series would pick up because the very next episode is yet another A tier. We've got the crisis. We have that beautiful moment in the dreamscape between Owen and Jaminia. Jaminia's speech there, one of my, if not my favourite moment for her character. And speaking of great moments for characters, we have what is probably the best moment in season 1. Well, okay, not the best moment in season 1, but the most triumphant, awesome moment for a character, and that was Jalarum starting to show hints of the leader he could eventually become, and finally getting the group to really get their act together and just work as a team. Sadly, the streak does get broken with a jungle. Not a lot. Not a lot happens in that one, but we do get a few jump scares in the tree. I'm putting the jungle into and there's a good mystery and build up with what the heck's happening with that elf. I'm putting the jungle into C tier. The tree, on the other hand, that is another A tier. Great fight scene, probably one of the best fight scenes so far. You'll notice that the fight scenes, the big monsters of the week, they seem to keep getting better and better as the series goes on. For a combination of reasons. One, of course, Josh is getting better as a DM as the series progresses, but also, there's kind of a line I feel in D&D where earlier levels, your combat encounters aren't going to be the most fun because your players aren't that strong, so there's not really much that they can do beyond I hit it or I blast it. And conversely, there aren't a lot of interesting creatures at that challenge rating. There's not a lot that Josh can really put in that has interesting things to fight. You usually just got a bunch of goblins and undead and wolves and stuff at the lower levels. The higher levels you get, the more the players can do, and of course the more the enemy creatures can do, which means that the fights start to get more and more entertaining, which of course is how you want it. Of course, eventually you start to cross a threshold where everyone becomes so OP that either your wizard's just killing everything in one hit, or your fight is taking a million years to whittle down the hit points. But, to be fair, Josh has actually managed to do a good job of avoiding both those things, and for now, again, the Night Twist, great combat encounter. It's great to see the party finally really working together and acting like a unit. And of course, have that somber moment with, Jalarum's father, and the fact that, as harsh as his words were, you kind of get the feeling this was him trying to be nice. And isn't that an ouch moment? The Nightmare. I'm putting the Nightmare in C or D. Okay, let me think about it. See, the Nightmare, introduced Nightmare, which this time not from Owen, not from the Warden, which, start to set up the plot. You've got moments with not much happened, but you know what? I think the Nightmare does deserve to be get a C tier. All right. The Temple. Sadly, that I'm gonna have to put in D tier. Yes, it was the start of the biggest meme in the series. You do not detect traps in the immediate vicinity, but aside from that, not a lot happens. And the joke of the you do not detect traps in the immediate vicinity is how repetitive it becomes. Unfortunately, this is one of the reasons. I know a lot of people disagree. I know a lot of people like dungeoneering. I know that for many, that's kind of one of the staples of D&D is roaming through the dungeons, looking for traps and treasure. But for me, it kind of just came down to the players walking around a lot and occasionally pausing to do search checks. And for me as a listener, that's not really all that fun. Again, not a terrible episode, had its merits, but it's not the. But for me, it's not the best. So, up next, we have the Beast, and that is an A tier, definitely. The Beast is one of the best combat encounters in the series. You get a lot of great moments. You get Owen using harm. You get Rose turning Aimer into a puppet. Speaking of which, I might make, I might make fun of Aimer for what a smug snake he is, but good God, he is good at pissing off. He is good at being just this slimy bastard. And it was a memorable introduction, and of course, what it meant for Faith Thurin, and of course, what it started to introduce for Faith Thurin and John's relationship. And the mistake, kind of the continuation of that fight, and adding a lot of character development. Is it as good as the... I'm going to put the mistake in A tier because I think a lot of the moments that I was just mentioning before also happened in mistakes. So yeah, those two go together. They're both A tier. The conflict. The party goes to Optimar, I should say. That is another streak breaker. Drops it down to C tier. We get a lot of interesting stuff, a lot of interesting character development, but it's not quite up to par to these ones, and there is still a bit of, waiting around, walking around, stuff like that. It's not quite as exciting as, the A tier stuff. However, the very next one, The Truth, that's our first S tier. One of, if not, that one has a close contender to being my favorite episode in the entire series. That speech from Jaminia, the reveal of Starjay, just the sheer atmosphere. There was a literal, real-life thunderstorm to add to that moment. It was just fantastic. Episode 8 was the moment that I became truly interested in the series. Episode 31 was when I became a fan. That was when I started to love this series. The Collapse, A tier. A great episode. We continue the fight. We get Jaminia talked down. We have that moment of Simula being a magnificent bitch. And we have Simula being a magnificent bitch. The reveal the gods have been helping them. And even though Simula technically won, there's just this great sense of optimism and camaraderie between the group that the series leaves on. And I feel it really leaves you hopeful and excited for Season 2. So with all that, yes, here we are. We have we have Season 1 on the tier list. As you can see, a lot of it is kind of lower down on the scale, and that's just simply because Josh is getting used to this. He's just starting. It's not gonna, he's not gonna hit it out of the park from the very beginning. But once he starts to get used to it, you can see, the 8 tiers, those are all the ones that are near the end. That's when Josh really starts to get the ball rolling and get his act together. So, everyone, I hope you enjoyed listening to this, listening to me, watching me, and I will see you next time for when I add in Season 2. Cheers, everyone. Bye.